You see mouse droppings in the garage, and most people reach for a broom. A military instructor checks something else first: the air itself. Was the space sealed up? Is there dust sitting undisturbed? Are there nests, urine stains, or droppings that could lift into the air the moment something disturbs them? That question matters right now because health officials are tracking a 2026 Hantavirus cluster linked to a cruise ship. And a separate suspected case in the U.S. was tied to someone cleaning a home where rodent droppings were present. Public risk is still considered low, but the mistake that put people in danger keeps showing up the same way every time: sweeping first and ventilating later. That order is backwards, and this video walks you through the correct sequence. Want to check before you touch anything? How to ventilate properly, how to disinfect, and when symptoms cross into emergency territory. Here's how this actually plays out. Every hantavirus exposure follows a predictable timeline, moving through phases that a prepared person can anticipate and work ahead of. Knowing where you are on that timeline puts you in front of the virus and ahead of a medical system that gets overwhelmed fast. What follows is your operational briefing. Run it like one. Hours 0 to 24, nothing feels wrong yet, and that is exactly the problem. Hantavirus enters the body silently, inhaled through aerosolized particles from rodent urine, droppings, or saliva. And the moment you disturb a nest or sweep a contaminated surface without protection, the exposure clock starts running. No sneeze, no cough, no signal of any kind. Across the United States, roughly 10% of deer mice test positive for Synnombra virus across their range. And in high-risk areas like the Four Corners region, that number climbs to around 30%. That shed you cleaned out last weekend, that cabin you opened for the first time in 6 months, the contamination was already waiting. The window to act is open right now, and it will not stay that way. Your actions during this period are procedural, not medical. Avoid re-entering any space with confirmed rodent activity without, at minimum, an N95 respirator, and use a P100 for heavy infestations or confined spaces. Seal the space and wait 30 minutes before going back in. Wet wipe all surfaces with a 1 to 10 bleach to water solution before any sweeping begins, because dry sweeping a contaminated surface is how particles become airborne. Nitrile gloves and eye protection are not optional. Write down the date and nature of the exposure, because weeks from now, when symptoms appear, that connection will be hard to reconstruct from memory. Days 1 to 7. Feeling fine is the trap. During this window, the virus replicates steadily while the body reports nothing. And most people go back to work, share air with their families, and have no reason to call a doctor because there is nothing to report. The immune system begins mounting a response that will peak at exactly the wrong moment. After the virus has already established itself in lung tissue, incubation runs anywhere from 1 to 8 weeks. And throughout that entire stretch, a person can feel completely normal. That is how hantavirus consistently outpaces every intervention. A 60-second daily check covers what you need: temperature, breathing quality, energy level. Any resting temperature above 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit is your escalation threshold, and any shortness of breath, even mild, even passing, is a 911 call rather than a wait-and-see situation. No outpatient treatment exists for hantavirus. ICU-level respiratory support is what keeps people alive before fluid fills the lungs, and arriving early is the only variable a patient can control. Tell at least one person in the household what the exposure was and what to watch for, because if you are incapacitated, someone else needs to be ready to make that call. Days 7 to 14. Symptoms arrive fast and escalate faster. Within 4 to 10 days of onset, hantavirus pulmonary syndrome moves from flu-like fatigue into acute respiratory distress, with lungs filling with fluid, blood pressure dropping, and oxygen saturation falling. Around 40% of patients at this stage require mechanical ventilation, and for anyone more than 60 minutes from a level 1 trauma center, transfer logistics alone can become fatal before treatment begins. The window is closing. Pre-positioning matters more here than any reactive decision made in the moment. Right now, locate the nearest ICU and the nearest level 1 trauma center, and know the drive time to each. A pulse oximeter costs around $18, and a reading below 92% saturation is a medical emergency. When calling 911 for someone in respiratory distress, the phrase "suspected hantavirus with respiratory failure" triggers a different response protocol than a general respiratory complaint. Use it. Weeks 2 to 4. Even a small cluster of cases can push rural ICU capacity to its limits within days, and ventilators are not stockpiled in most rural hospitals. During the 1993 Four Corners outbreak, 48 confirmed cases required multi-state coordination involving federal, state, and military research institutions. When rodent populations spike regionally, bed availability disappears fast, and the emergency room waiting area fills with people who drove 3 hours to reach it. Maintaining a 30-day prescription medication supply is the baseline for this phase. Beyond that, 72 packets of oral rehydration salts for a family of 4 address a real risk. Secondary dehydration kills in respiratory crises before the virus does. Know which neighbors have medical training, because in a saturated system, the nurse 3 doors down becomes a primary care resource. Build that relationship before it becomes necessary. Weeks 4 to 8. Regional outbreaks stress everything downstream from them. Local stores see sharp surges in pantry staple purchasing within the first 48 hours of an outbreak announcement. Shelves clear and agricultural workers, already the highest exposure population, stop showing up. Neighbors who were friendly become cautious, and the community fracture follows quickly behind. 90 days of caloric baseline storage, 2,000 calories per person per day, built around canned protein, nut butter, and dried legumes. It provides a foundation that panic buying can't disrupt. Establishing a resource-sharing agreement with 3 to 5 trusted neighbors now, before any crisis, is what makes that foundation useful. Who has the generator? Who has the well? Who has medical training? A written agreement made in calm conditions carries more weight than a verbal one made under pressure. Months 2 to 3. The outbreak gets declared contained. The pressure lifts and people make the predictable error of believing the risk left with a headline. Rodent populations don't disappear when an outbreak does. Contaminated structures stay contaminated. Dried fecal matter in walls and insulation can remain infectious for several days indoors. And the first warm weekend after the all clear, people open their cabins and garages and phase 1 restarts with no protective instincts in place. Sealing every exterior gap larger than a quarter inch is where the cycle breaks. Steel wool packed into gaps and sealed with expanding foam is one of the most reliable physical barriers against rodent entry. Snap traps, not poison bait stations, which let rodents die inside walls, placed in a 10-foot perimeter around food storage, address the ongoing population. A full EPA bleach protocol, decontamination of any structure with rodent activity, completed before occupancy, is the step that actually ends the exposure cycle, rather than just pausing it. The assumption most people carry into a situation like this is that the risk will present itself visibly. Droppings are there, the danger feels manageable, a quick sweep and a spray of bleach takes care of it. What the assumption costs is the recognition that the particles are invisible. The incubation period severs the connection between exposure and illness, and by the time the risk feels undeniable, a person is already inside it, while the medical system they're counting on is already running out of capacity. The corrected model is harder to hold. Treat every space with rodent activity as a confirmed biohazard until a proper decontamination protocol is complete. Pre-position the monitoring equipment and the community relationships before any exposure event forces the question. No one survives this kind of timeline as a solo unit. The community around you is the actual resource, and your job is to make it more capable before the pressure arrives to test it. Subscribe and drop a comment with your region or your high-risk structure, and the next video will address specific scenarios directly. The related video on rodent-borne disease vectors covered the population dynamics that drive outbreak timing. Watch that one next. Stay informed and stay positioned, because the calm you have right now is the asset. Spending it on complacency is the one mistake with no correction window.